Hello and welcome to Caracas for an exclusive interview with the President of Venezuela, Mr. Nicolás Maduro. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Mr. President, from the United States of America, we have heard some very tough language against Venezuela and against you personally. The ambassador of the United States at the United Nations has declared it's high time Mr. Maduro should give up power. The Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, has said the government of the United States will not stay inactive. And the President of Colombia, Mr. Santos, has said that a change of regime will occur soon. What's happening?
An offensive which was prepared with a view to the possibility that in Venezuela there might be a positive outcome, as will be the case during the forthcoming presidential elections. This has created a form of pressure on the countries. This is not something which is new. We have seen three presidents of the U.S. come and go: Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and now we have Donald Trump. Each one of them had their approach to Venezuela, but the official policy of the imperialistic United States with regard to the Bolivarian Revolution was to subject it to pressure and to try and effect regime change. Now we've got Donald Trump. Now we've got an extreme right approach. The extreme right there, the Ku Klux Klan. We're persecuted by Ku Klux Klan.
I'd like to understand. The President of Bolivia has stated that it's not only pressures we're talking about a possible military invasion.
This will never happen. I can guarantee you that.
He says there's a plan for a military invasion. Do you have any information on this? After the presidential elections?
You can be certain that the extremists are reaching levels of madness which are exceptional, as these statements against Venezuela, threats, including Donald Trump during August last from his residence in Miami, who had stated that the military option had not been completely abandoned as far as Venezuela was concerned. You can be certain that they are envisaging all forms of madness. You can be certain of this because they extremists from the extreme right. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I'm talking about the Ku Klux Klan operating against Venezuela, but the geopolitical situation, the strength of the Bolivarian Revolution, this multipolar world in which we live means that an option like this cannot be ruled out.
Are you afraid of a military coup? Several military officers have been arrested recently. There are rumors according to which there may be a coup d'etat.
That's what the United States government would like.
Is this are you saying that lightly, or is it serious?
Well, I'm stating this because we have, over the last 5 years, we've dismantled several groups which have attempted to set up this kind of operation in Venezuela, in the embassy, and so on. And that's part of the tradition of the United States. You can imagine in the 20th century in Latin America, century of invasions and
But we're in the 21st century now.
But nothing has changed for imperialism because they continue to see us as their backyard, unfortunately. It's difficult to understand for the rest of the world or in Europe, but you have to understand that the Monroe Doctrine, which stated that America was the Americans, refers to the United States. We are for them, we're Martians, we're not Americans for them. But we are, of course, South Americans, Latin Americans. But the Monroe Doctrine was very vigorous at the time and was established throughout the 19th century, during the 20th century. And it seemed that with Barack Obama, at one point, we might have envisaged a change. There might have been a new relationship between the elites which were governing the U.S. from Washington, the peoples of Latin America. But that has not been the case. But ultimately, what is happening has come from the legacy of Barack Obama against Venezuela.
Aren't you afraid of a military coup?
Well, we don't act upon our fears. We act with regard to certainties. If the government of the United States attempted a putsch, you can be certain there will be a counter-putsch. A civil military putsch will be just as strong as took place in April in 2002. They already attempted a putsch. You may remember on the 11th of April 2002 with Hugo Chavez, they ousted him for 47 hours. They sequestered him and they tried to exfiltrate him. But who saved him? The people and the military. You can be convinced of the total loyalty of the people and the military to the Bolivarian Revolution. We have the people are very close to the army and vice versa. And if, as a result of Washington's maneuverings,
as regards the elections, you are aiming to get 10 million votes in the election. This has never happened before.
This is an objective, let's say.
Yes, it's an objective. The citizens obviously don't have to obey that objective. You've never reached that level, not even when Mr. Chavez was in power.
You know, this is a battle objective order, and it's a debt for the Venezuelans who can understand it. It's something that's in their hearts. 10 million votes, that would be like with Chavez, this historical objective of the Venezuelan people that enter into this electoral battle with this passion, with this people's enthusiasm. The people will once again reclaim the flame, and with people saying 10 million, we're talking about a debt here. Now, whatever you think, there'll be a landslide victory.
There's a problem. The international community, the countries in the region, the United States, Canada, Europe, have stated that they are not going to recognize those elections.
You're talking about your international community.
The Lima Group, the European Union.
But what about the rest of the world? You've got the United Nations, you've got 150 or so countries. This international community is not that of Washington in its alliance with some right-leaning governments from Europe or from Latin America. The international community is represented by the people of the world. So let us not endorse what your international community is iterating and reiterating.
It's not only the right-wing governments. The governments of the left in Europe state that in France, for example, the government says, Mr. Macron...
On the left, Macron, on the left, on the right, neoliberal. He's in the process of destroying France. He's on the ultra-right. You can see he's stripping away workers' rights. He's privatizing public companies and transport. How can you say that Macron is not of the right? He is known as representing the interests of the bankers, the richest people in France.
But some people assert that the elections won't be transparent in Venezuela. The opposition has been invalidated, have been exiled, imprisoned, and that everything is being done to guarantee your victory, and that these will not be free and transparent elections, and that's the reason why they won't be recognized, and there will be more sanctions. Do you really believe that this will happen, or these are just empty threats?
Well, first of all, these are unacceptable threats for any sovereign country in the world. It's completely unacceptable. Nobody should be able to interfere in the domestic affairs of a given country. Venezuela is a democratic country. There's no doubt of that. We are a sovereign state. We have our own political system, and there will be elections in Venezuela.
There will be elections. Some say that they will be postponed.
In Venezuela, there will be elections on Sunday, the 20th May. The people will vote. There will be a very large turnout, as big as in France and the United States.
Won't win.
I invite you to come to Venezuela to bear witness to the strongest electoral turnout in Venezuela, and bigger than in France or the United States or elsewhere, including in Colombia, many locations governed by the right which don't have any slightest form of morality to call into question their political system.
What about if there are more sanctions by the European Union? What will you do? Will you continue to work?
Well, it's all the same to me. Sanctions, because this elite which is governing in Europe has in its mindset a superiority complex coming from colonialism.
Are they racist?
Yes, they are racist. It's a form of racism, social racism, which is the legacy of their superiority complex. They think that they're still dealing with their former colonies, the colonies which they used to govern. They still think they're masters of these countries. We're already free in the 21st century. All the same to me. I don't care one whit for foreign public opinion.
Next, if you win the elections, will you revoke the National Assembly?
The idea which was floated to me seems to be a very good one. Now, as of June, well, there'll be the revocatory right which will emerge. The people can come together or collate signatures or garner signatures to deal with some parliamentarians for the right who've really failed.
I'd like to talk now about the economic situation. You have increased the minimum wage since 2013 20 times, but for the lives of people, there hasn't been much change because there is 13,000% inflation.
Where did you pull this figure from? 13,000%?
It comes from the International Monetary Fund.
The IMF does nothing to do with the situation in Venezuela. They're just
So are they
hitmen.
only lies? We don't have any national statistics on inflation.
Of course, there are statistics available. You've got the Central Bank of Venezuela, which has statistics. You can't buy everything or think of everything that IMF provides you. If you have to think about it, you drill down in depth. They are against our model, against the Bolivarian revolution, because it's an alternative system to that of the IMF. Nothing that the IMF says about Venezuela is credible.
So they're all lies.
Yes, all lies. Of course, there is inflation, but it is induced inflation. The product of an attack against the exchange rate system, against the national currency, we have been victims. Well, in fact, I had to effect a monetary reconversion because we've been victims of something which had already been done against other revolutionary change processes in Latin America, the physical theft of Venezuelan money to create internal chaos in the buying system, in the payment system, in the general system trade. So I had to decree a form of monetary reconversion which will be activated on the 4th of June as part of measures which will be anti-inflationary and as part of measures required for the country's stability.
But we can say that the situation, the economic situation, is very bad. Some even say it's catastrophic. Same thing for oil. The price of oil is higher today than in 2014. But given that the production capacity of oil in Venezuela has fallen by so much, Venezuela can't benefit from this. This is the reason why many people say that the situation is catastrophic and that you are responsible for this.
Well, you need to be aware that we have an empire operating against us.
But you can't put all the blame on the American
Well,
empire.
that's your opinion. It's not mine, but you're asking me questions. I'm answering.
I'd like to have your opinion. That's why I'm asking questions.
Well, that was my opinion. I let you ask me questions. I give you my answers. Of course, we've got economic problems, like all other countries. Now, we're looking into this, and we resolve these problems, and we're doing it gradually. We're going to sort things out. Of course, we've got a major economic potential here. We have our own model, indeed, but we're subject to a major war on two fronts, and from the imperialist forces, the United States, and the oligarchs in Venezuela who don't like the fact they lost the election.
Now I'd like to talk about the humanitarian situation. It would seem that there are health problems, the rise in the infant mortality rates, people people who don't have enough food, people are going hungry, an increase in epidemics such as diphtheria, which had been eradicated in the past. Do you refuse to talk about a humanitarian crisis? Why?
Why are you saying that I haven't talked about this or haven't admitted this?
In the past, you denied those facts.
But show me where I said this.
When you spoke to the Organization of American States in 2016,
That's not true. I forgive you, but it's not true. You're poorly informed. Don't be seduced by misinformation. Thousands of people follow those forms of media and who are misinformed about Venezuela's situation. The story of diphtheria and measles is not true. We're vaccinating the whole population free of charge, children, adults, against all illnesses that can be dealt with by vaccination. Now, I can tell you it is true. We've had sourcing problems, supply problems, but no more so than in Colombia, where misery has reached 55%. Now, in terms of food, Venezuela is developing policies, unique policies, and this is how we have been able to put into place a program which has enabled us to maintain the appropriate food level or the supply of food for the population.
But there is a problem. Apparently, the Venezuelans are fleeing their country. People even say that over 1 million people have left the country.
You're a conservative, aren't you?
The United Nations are saying that there's a migration crisis.
Where did the United Nations say this? It's not true. It's just not true. Colombia and the Colombian government, Mr. Santos and the outgoing government are all part of this permanent campaign against Venezuela. And he invented the story according to which about 1,500,000 Venezuelans have left our country and gone to Colombia.
The Red Cross has confirmed this. Over 1,500,000 people have fled.
Well, I don't know. You've got your information, you've got your data, you believe into it, but I'm not so sure about what you're saying.
I don't know what your sources of information, what's your analysis? Are the Venezuelans leaving their country or not?
Colombia. Colombia itself, there is an internal agency there which gathers statistics on internal immigration. It's just published data on Colombians who have emigrated, which corresponds to the trend over the last few years with a slight increase. There are 200,000 Venezuelans in Colombia currently, but it's not the French media or the media of the United States who are saying so. But I can tell you Venezuela is hosting 5,600,000 Colombians who are now in Venezuela.
The past was only yesterday.
5,600,000. How can you, in your analysis, deal with this? 5,600,000 people in a given country and say it's the past who are working, 5,600,000 Colombians working in Venezuela who enjoy the same rights as Venezuela.
On that point, you're right.
If you look at the Santos government in Colombia, they've talked about the 1 million Colombians who've come to live here, are fleeing poverty, misery, war. People don't ever mention that, just reiterating this campaign of denigration. Now, I can tell you that Venezuela, that the level of immigration has increased, as in many countries.
So there's no migration crisis in your country?
There is no migration crisis. There isn't one. People have tried to create one, but this campaign, this very against us, this media campaign, it's the contrary. We're bringing back comrades. Comrades are coming back to our country. They went abroad and they realized how beautiful our country was. And this is all part of this very negative campaigns where people say Venezuela is chaotic, there's no order. There's order in Venezuela. There's a sense of direction. There's a national strategy, a national project. We've made major progress. There's a great deal of hope in the new constitution, the new alternative society, an alternative to neoliberal capitalism.
I'd like to ask you a question because you have been accused of receiving funds for your election campaign from the Albrecht company. You have never shed any light or responded to those accusations. $30 million to finance your campaign, given by this Brazilian company.
For which campaign?
The presidential election in 2013. And this is an extract from a file of a Brazilian investigation.
Well, let's take a look at that. If there is something you cannot reproach me is to be somebody's corrupted or being a bandit. I've never needed, I will never need the money of Odebrecht, and I've never needed so in my life. The focus of my life is not material wealth. The focus of my life is a cause, the cause of Venezuela, with deep spiritual, moral roots. People can say what they want. You can accuse me of what you want. But those forms of criticisms, that just concerns the people who issue them.
One last question on the Middle East. Are you afraid that Mr. Trump is in the process of preparing for a new war in Iran, in Palestine? Are you afraid that Mr. Trump will be able to create a lot of problems in that part, not only in that part of the world, but in the Middle East in general?
Well, what I believe is that the United States finds itself in a state of strategic decline, in a period of strategic decline where they've shown a form of permanent improvisation. It's all false, these attacks against Syria, they're all false, these fake chemical weapons factories. We saw that it was all untrue, and everybody remains silent. Nobody is saying anything, and this has demonstrated the immorality of the foreign policy of the United States. Permanent improvisation with which they address their foreign policy. They're aiming currently, they're targeting the Middle East to create a major conflict. Fortunately, the Islamic Republic of Iran is very strong, very robust, a very clear foreign policy, and I'm convinced that they will manage to overcome the threats of the United States and preserve peace in their country and in the region. I believe that ultimately we are witnessing a seminal moment in history. Latin America is moving as well.
But the right is winning almost everywhere.
Perhaps this is just a one-off cycle, but in Latin America there's a new wave of change.
It would seem that the current wave shows that the left is losing out.
Well, I think there's a real solidity here which has never existed beforehand. The existence of l'ALBA, the governments of the left in a broad swathe of Latin America and South America, the strength of the Bolivarian Revolution and the Cuban Revolution, all this has let us have a glimpse of a new wave of support from the people. The people won't tolerate what's happened over here, what's happened in Argentina. 70% of people disapprove of President Macri in Argentina following his announcement that he will get help from the IMF. Do you think that Brazil will remain docile, will accept Lula to be convicted? If there were elections today, Lula would have a landslide victory. If there were elections today in Argentina, the people will kick out Macri. So let's wait for better times for Latin America, because they will come.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for having given us this interview, this exclusive interview. Thank you very much for having watched it.